Revisiting History. Today we're going to focus on something a little bit, something that I'd overlooked originally, in that my one of my big mentors, Catherine Perone, I've actually done a Revisiting People on her. She had mentioned a place called Sunnyslope in the Arizona area, and I didn't really think much of it. I hadn't heard much of it, but apparently it's actually going to be a pretty important aspect of the greater Phoenix area, which goes on to expand to basically every area of the metropolitan Phoenix area, right? So it's at a point where you have many small areas outside of Phoenix, but for all intents and purposes, it's Phoenix. Now, the book is called Images of America, and this book itself focuses on Sunnyslope, of course, and you can find these texts all over the place. In fact, I have another one that we'll get into later called, I believe it's on Mesa, and these are going to help us to explore the cities more. These are sold at most museums. I believe I got this one at Arkansas. No, one of the more artistic ones. I can't remember quite which one it was, but I did get this at one of the museums. They run a little bit pricey, again, but they are worth the data, right? So we're going to dive into a lot of stuff. Like I said, going back to early Arizona history is usually a pretty interesting aspect. And as always, when doing this type of research, I typically find things that are more than I'm expecting. So they're almost meta-real. You know, some of these stories that you find are they're always individuals that are creating these paths, and individuals that are expanding on these journeys and building these amazing things. So we're going to start out with Images of America, Sunnyslope by Reba Wells Grandrud. Okay. And in the very beginning, it starts with a shot of the canals. Of course, the canal systems in Arizona are extremely important. My name is S.B. Schreffler, of course. If you haven't heard before, I'm doing Revisiting History. I've done all of the content so far. I do documentaries, I do interviews, I do book reviews, and we're expanding everything we do. Some of the interviews coming up are going to be very interesting. They're with very high-level characters that I believe would not have been covered otherwise. So this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. Now, this book here goes over the Arizona canal systems, the early settlers, the Desert Mission, World War II and beyond, growth in business, and then the Sunnyslope Historical Society. Okay, so the big thing whenever we're looking at Sunnyslope in general, there's a lot of locations that are extremely important, but the ones that we're going to check out here soon are going to be, for one, the Sunnyslope Rock Garden. This is a garden made exclusively of rocks, and it has a little bit of foliage that's in place throughout it, but it's a beautiful spot. There's also the Cid Castle, which was built by a gentleman named Kenneth Hall, who actually took Medicare funds and then switched them over to actually create this. The big S, it's the S for Sunnyslope. It's the one that represents it. The Desert Mission, of course, and then the Norton House, of course, because Norton is going to be a very significant character in the story we're talking about. Now, I'm going to take a quick break, and we are going to continue after this. All right, so we're going to look at the forward first. It's the Sunnyslope Community. It kind of encapsulates the whole thing. It says, shortly after the turn of the 20th century, miners, intrepid immigrants, characters, some honorable, others not, and health seekers, the big one, came to this hostile desert environment to discover a better way to live. The Sunnyslope Historical Society Museum is going to be the big one that's going to be having most of the historical content that you're going to want to see within the area. Now, it says community and city were and are located in the low elevation of the Salt River Valley, a vast and alluvial plain that stretches hot and dry from the Superstition Mountains to the Estrella Mountains. That's a pretty large area. The Estrella Mountains are very south. Superstition Mountains are going to be far out to the east. Okay, so we're talking that part of Phoenix over there. It says William R. Norton, a California architect who loved the desert, is considered to be the founder of Sunnyslope, and he's really going to be the gentleman who we owe maybe even the history of Phoenix too, because Sunnyslope in a way is the history, or a large chunk of the history of Phoenix. Now, in chapter 1, it goes into the Arizona Canal. It says, in 1867, while cutting river grasses for Fort McDowell military post, John W. Jack Swilling, who we'll get into later, recognized the irrigation potential in long-abandoned Hohokam ditches and organized the first of many irrigation canal companies. So by 1890, the valley population was 11,000. That's quite significant. Now, these irrigation ditches and these things that were created by the Hohokam are still used today. And I hit on this all the time because people say, okay, well, we built the irrigation. The irrigation within Phoenix is so good. The canal systems are amazing. But it was because the Hohokam sorry about some of the pronunciations, had built these out extremely well. I mean, using the mathematics of plumbing to actually stretch out the resources throughout the entire valley. I mean, we're talking from not just the Superstition Mountains and the Estrella Mountains. We're talking from, all the way from the White Tanks down to South Mountain and then over to Superstition. So it's the whole valley as opposed to a small portion. So we do have Jack Swilling taking the canals and turning them into something more marketable than they had been, because of course they've been abandoned whenever the Hohokam had abandoned them in about 1450 AD. So slightly around the time of colonization, but a little bit before. Seen here in the desert floor, it says the Shaw Butte. That's going to be a popular area. And then they had the Valley View Sanitarium, which opened in 1924 near 19th Avenue and west end of the mountain. Now, these early housing structures, I'll show you the one up top, are going to be extremely temporary almost looking, but these are full-blown living quarters, right? People came out here for health for the most part because of the fact they had tuberculosis, they had asthma. People back then believed that if you came out to the dry heat, I believe in my interview with Miss Fleming, she's a great woman, she also even says her family came out here for the same reason. So if you see these shacks and stuff, people were coming out here because they were trying to survive, right? They come out to the most hostile environment to try and survive the diseases that they had contracted out east, right? So tuberculosis was a huge one, and then you see them start to live in these very, very, very kind of simple structures. There's one museum that we'd been to where you can actually go inside and see what the structures were like. I mean, it's literally like a roll-up tent. You have a couple structural elements, and then you have a roll-up cloth, and then that allows you just to kind of see out into the open. So it's not much protection, but unless you're living in a high storm area, it's not really necessary that you would need the protection, which we'll get into later. So here's another one we'd say. This is William Abbott, a tubercular sufferer, came alone in 1927. So 1927 came alone to Sunnyslope and built this little ramshack house, which he then moved his family into after he had spent some time in the area. But I mean, it's even the one that he had restructured for his family purposes, it looks like it's still just a tent, and then next to it's another tent, and then living out in this kind of desert environment, you're dealing with not only the elements but also I almost want to say the temperature, because the temperature's an element in itself, but the critters that are out in this desert environment are the ones that are going to get you, especially in this type of housing situation. Now, early settlers, it says in 1891, California William R. Norton, he came here hoping to start some business, and he had some pretty poor health, so he comes out to Sunnyslope. And then in 1907, Gila County Courthouse in Globe, and in 1908, the Carnegie Library in Phoenix were both built. Norton relocated his family in 1907 to the desert. to a kind of, it says comfortable frame home. So I'm not exactly sure what a frame home is, but you saw the structures that we're speaking of. Now, William R. Norton was a professional architect, so by trade he built things. This is a positive thing. And then apparently his home was was built in 1895, but was on 2222 West Washington Street. So hopefully we can get down there and see it. This is a photo of Mr. Norton himself. He doesn't look sickly. I mean, he doesn't look. So the next gentleman we're going to speak about is going to be Ernest Phelps, and apparently he also came out west, and he applied in 1914 for 160-acre desert homesteads. We talked about the Homestead Act. We talked about the push for people to move out west. That way we could populate the area that had not been populated other than by Native Americans until that point. Of course, the Native Americans, that's a whole other different story. Very sad story. If there's anybody out there, I'd love to speak to you about the Native culture and what's happened and what's continuing to happen, especially with COVID-19 happening currently. So then we have Abel Service Station and Grocery. That's still apparently existent. It says it was the main stop between Cave Creek and Phoenix. So that's going to be another big stop we're going to try and get to. Apparently, they also had a beer drinking burrow. So apparently they also had a beer drinking burrow, which is a pretty strange attraction at the service station, and they would just toss a bottle in his mouth, and he did drink the liquor, which is a strange thing to even add in there, but what an attraction, right? So then we have the Desert Mission, which is where we start to see from the area which is led mostly by the church to becoming a more secularized area of the city. It says Sunnyslope in the 1920s was considered by many a place to shun, the abode of sick people whose germs were contagious. Into the situation came Margaret Coley and Elizabeth Beatty, compassionate newcomers themselves who wanted to help, to ease the pain, and to provide services to the needy. Boy, do we need that now. So, it says of the Sunnyslope population, staggering 90% had tuberculosis and 10% had asthma, and we see Marguerite Coley and her husband William trying to basically roll this back with what they had, but at the same time it's you have 90% tuberculosis rate with the 10% asthma rate. That's you're dealing with some significant issues health wise, and this is back in a time where resources were very minimum. I've seen some of the sanitariums or some of the rooms that they would put sick people in, and it's just a room. It's basically just a room. But the book goes on and it starts to explain some of the earlier history with the schools, with the McMahon Memorial Chapel, of course. This desert mission becomes extremely important in the success of Sunnyslope. And then we have the Knights of the Round Table Library, which was first constructed in 1929, and it started out as basically nothing. I mean, almost literally nothing, and they started adding, and eventually it became an actual real library. You can kind of see some of the differences between the old and the new libraries, but the growth of this place is so expansive, and then we see the construction of Wrigley Hall, which is still a very significant place in Arizona, which was built in 1930. So places like Wrigley Hall, places like there's a big golf course around here. I don't quite recall the name right now, but there's the Wigwam that are all extremely. So in 1942, all the buildings at the Desert Mission were destroyed except for the library and Wrigley Hall. The loss was estimated at 22,000, but there were no injuries or loss of life. Thank God, right? Think about what impact that could have actually had on the growth of the area generally. But like I said, still a very sick area. So eventually we do have the construction of the John C. Lincoln Hospital, which is the successor of the Desert Missions Medical Clinic, who was basically created by just those two people. In 1949, they started the John C. Lincoln Hospital, which of course began to roll back a lot of the diseases that we had in the area. The book is extremely extensive as far as photos go. It goes very deep into, it even opens up families. It shows some of the local sports teams, some of the local parks and such, and it gives a context into a time that is not something that we can see now. Even the first nursery on here, 1937, it shows the cots that are lined up, and it looks more like a mass casualty treatment area than a nursery, right? Because of the way that it's set up. Now, starting in World War II, Sunnyslope tried 4 times to incorporate as a town, but failed each time by a narrow margin. In 1959, the community was annexed by the city of Phoenix, with a new era beginning. So we have in 1959 Phoenix saying, we're taking Sunnyslope and we're throwing it into what the city of Phoenix is becoming, right? So that's a pretty big change for Sunnyslope, because then it's no longer its own individual unincorporated area. It's now part of Phoenix, the city. So it says a sub-city hall was established at 8900 North Central Avenue, 1959. It's at 8225 North Central Avenue if you want to go check that out. But again, it's fairly contemporary. And then you do have also the Sunnyslope Presbyterian Church at 9317 North 2nd Street, built in 1949, with the church actually founded in 1927. I always think it's funny when you get to see some of these constructions are actually really strange, because they put AD, or they'll put some very strange symbols. I know at the Prescott Courthouse you have some pretty interesting, very beautiful work by the Masons. The Desert Mission Nursery building was constructed at 9301 North 2nd Street, just to the east of the Sunnyslope Presbyterian Church. So you see these structures being kind of laid out next to each other. And then the first Mennonite church in Phoenix was organized in 1946. So it still exists, and it's actually behind the current Mennonite church, which was built in 1993. Like I said, it goes so in depth into the structures that I kind of skip through some of them, because they're, for time's sake, for one, and then for two, because they're not really necessary to the backbone of Sunnyslope. Now, built in the 1930s, a second way south of Dunlap, they built the Sunnyslope House. Did not have air conditioning even in the hot Arizona months. During the summer, people often slept outdoors on cots with cot legs and cans of kerosene to prevent bugs or scorpions crawling in the bed with them. So, like I said, man, even in 1930, we're talking scorpions like crawling on you. And these houses they're not bad. It's just the heat in Arizona is bad, and so are the scorpions, and so are the snakes, and so are the spiders, and the I mean, it's like every plant is out here to bite back. Sunnyslope High School, of course, was they had their first seniors in 1954. You had the Vikings. They all went up and they painted the Sunnyslope S, which is accessible. And then eventually we have the construction at John C. Lincoln Hospital. Next chapter is the growth of business, of course, which the business, of course, flourished in that area, being as it was in Phoenix. One of the more interesting areas that I did see on here was the Quinonset, is a World War II surplus building that was brought to 3rd Street in 1946 to serve as a laundromat. It served as a home for many small businesses during the next 2 decades. So from 1972 to 1985, it houses small mom-and-pop creamer wood products. So, but it is a World War II surplus building, which would be a cool view just to get up and see next to it, right? Some of the other locations are interesting, and then also individuals, right? So I love the individual impact, and the individual impact of Sunnyslope is amazing, because first of all, we have Norton, right? Norton's an architect, a sick man, but he comes out here and he basically starts building Sunnyslope up from nothing. But then we have a gentleman in Dr. Kenneth E. Hall, who had a North Mountain Hospital. It says that it was facing the slope of Shaw Butte North Mountain Range, and he's an interesting character. I did a little bit of research on him because there wasn't a lot of information on him in the book. So he did end up going ahead and building this place called Cid Castle, which he wanted to be a bowling alley. It's a pretty very very strange structure, but the structure itself was supposed to be a bowling alley, and I mean I'll try and dub in the image. But within his actual hospital, he did not only house humans who were sick, but he also had baboons. Okay, and this is going to be important because I'm actually going to read this article from this excerpt from PhoenixMag.com, and it talks actually funnily about Ernest McFarland. So it says Hall's reputation as an eccentric but brilliant healer grew. He became the personal physician of the governor Ernest McFarland, who was previous to Barry Goldwater, and held political fundraisers for him and Congressman John Rhodes. He had the drive and the charisma to run for political office, Walter Hall says, that's his son. Ultimately, a doctor's outside-the-box tendencies got to the better of himself, according to his son. He started rubbing shoulders with members of the mob. He fancied himself a Pat Rack-style born vivant, chasing women, doing crazy things, and making money. He cultivated a bad boy reputation. By the mid-1960s, though, he was losing his golden touch, becoming increasingly isolated as his only hired help was often alcoholics could put up with his narcissistic ways, Walter Hall says. He was a bright guy, but so self-absorbed with his judgment, he suffered. Dr. Hall started performing unsanctioned medical operations. Unsanctioned medical operations. My father was the first in Arizona to do gastric bypass surgery. It was a big money maker. Another lucrative operation removed the glomus gland from the neck to allegedly cure asthma. For these surgeries, my father was put on notice by the medical community, but the era wasn't as regulated, so he could call his own shots. Then Dr. Hall's baboon got loose. His baboons got loose. When he had a dozen apes, orangutans, and baboons at the hospital, and a few at our home, Walter says, it was the most woe-begone zoo you could imagine. My father never took good care of the animals. He had a gibbon ape on the chain, and it accidentally strangled itself. The fugitive baboon had escaped previously, but had been lured back into its cage by food. When the baboon escaped its cage again in 1967 and scrambled into the nearby steep terrain in the North Mountain, the police were summoned. The baboon weighed 50 pounds and had an arm strength that reportedly 7 times that of a human. Teeth 2.5 inches long and could easily kill a person, remembers former Phoenix police Darrell Dougherty, who pursued the primate. The creature was very nimble and suddenly emerged on an outcrop above a cop. We unloaded about a dozen 38 rounds into the animal before it dropped dead. So we see, and then shortly after it says, medical improprieties finally caught up with Dr. Hall and ended his career. The state revoked the hospital's license in 1971, and he returned to the facility into a nursing home and later leased it to a drug rehab clinic. Dr. Hall eventually lost $150,000 to settle a malpractice suit, and the former hospital was razed in the late 1970s. Hall's physician license was revoked in 1971 after four patients died during gastric bypass surgery. In 1974, he pleaded guilty to diverting $16,000 in Medicare funds to help construct another grand venture, the Spanish Trail Bowling Alley, which is actually now the castle I was speaking of. At 80 years old, the dreamer Dr. Hall attempted to get a heart transplant at the Mayo Clinic, but died 4 years later in 2001. So fairly recently, but absolute mad lad, right? I mean, I could probably do a thing on him, but it's pretty straightforward. The man had baboons and orangutans and apes, and then a freaking, one got loose. And they shot it and killed it dead right there in Phoenix. I mean, it's not that far from here. And I mean, we talk about the funny stories of deer and stuff getting loose. Not deer, but horses running around and stuff. But I remember a llama got loose not too long ago here in Phoenix. But can you imagine a full-grown, angry ape that wasn't treated real well in captivity. That's a bad scenario for any individual. Other spots in Sunnyslope that are going to be really important to anybody wanting to visit are going to be Sunnyslope Mountain, also called S Mountain. That was constructed originally by the first class of seniors graduating from Sunnyslope High School. That's pretty interesting. You have People's Drugstore Building, which was the future home of the Historical Society, built in 1953. And then you have also another spot known as the Sunnyslope Historical Society, Connie and Jim Creamer campus, built in 2009. So we have a couple areas where you can actually explore. Probably not right now because things are shut down pretty hard due to COVID-19. However, when things do open up, go out there and support your history. Social distance for the moment. Stay home. Don't do anything too crazy. But then there's a funny thing in here. It says, a time capsule was placed in the wall in the museum in 2000 during a community day event. The cylinder is to be opened by members of the Historical Society in March 2020. March 2020. Okay, so that's right now if you're seeing this video soon. Other aspects of this area, like I said, the main ones that I took note of are the big ass, for the Sunnyslope Rock Garden, which isn't even really mentioned, the Yellow Cid Castle, the Desert Mission, and then the Norton House are the real big spots. The Norton House looks like it's in some sort of state of decay. But then this book is constructed by Arcadia Publishing, and you can get books about basically any part of the U.S. if you would like. It's a great resource if you're looking for more information. Again, it has information that the internet doesn't have. Internet has information that the books don't have, so it's good to crack both resources and really dive into it. I got a lot out of the book. I read it 3 or 4 times just to make sure I had the information really kind of knocked into the head, and then I wanted to present this because I thought it was a really good book. And not just that, Sunnyslope is massively underrated as far as locations go. We're going to get out there soon and revisit some history, hopefully see actually Sunnyslope up close, so stay tuned.